Hello, my friends. After last week's negotiations, the question everyone keeps asking is, what's the next step in the Russia-Ukraine talks? The answer, whether Washington and Brussels like it or not, is that the ball is firmly in Kyiv's court, or more precisely, in Zelensky's unread inbox. Trump has been speaking to Putin and to the Ukrainian leadership, including Zelensky, and he made something very clear. Russia is broadly fine with the current peace proposal, but Zelensky has not even bothered to read it. As of a few hours before Trump spoke, his own team had gone through the 28-point document and loved it. Not just liked it, loved it, while their boss, the self-styled wartime leader, hadn't taken 5 minutes to look at it. Trump even said outright that Russia would probably rather take the whole of Ukraine if it came to that, but they are nevertheless prepared to negotiate on the basis of this peace plan. That tells you who is serious about ending the war and who is addicted to the performance of it. Think about the picture that emerges. On one side, you have Moscow, which has been clear for years about its red lines, its security requirements, and its willingness to negotiate when treated seriously. On the other, you have Zelensky flying around the world, loving the red carpets and the photo ops, too busy with his endless travel schedule and media appearances to sit down and read the single most important document that could bring an end to the destruction of his country. Even people in his own circle are reportedly telling him, Mr. President, this is actually a good text. Trump has made it plain. Zelensky's entourage has read the proposal, and they are enthusiastic about it. The only man who has not read it is the one who keeps telling the world he will fight for peace, while he sends more and more Ukrainians to die at the front. And yet, in the middle of all this, Washington still cannot break its habit of writing checks to a black hole. The Pentagon is moving ahead with an $800 million package for the Zelensky regime over the next 2 years, $400 million in 2026 and $400 million in 2027. Trump can say publicly that there will be no more money for Ukraine, but the reality of the Pentagon's $900 billion budget tells a different story. In percentage terms, Ukraine is a small slice of that pie, but a small slice of $900 billion is still a huge amount of cash being funneled into the most corrupt state in Europe, one of the most corrupt in the entire world, with virtually no meaningful audit. For 4 years, the money has poured into a system that rewards oligarchs, middlemen, and Western contractors, while ordinary Ukrainians get funerals and amputations. This is why images of Bugattis and Ferraris with Ukrainian plates in places like Monaco are so powerful. People immediately understand the corruption when you talk about golden toilets, luxury supercars, seaside villas, and ex-officials partying abroad while conscripts are dragged off the streets back home. It gives taxpayers in the United States and Europe a visual. They may not follow the intricacies of IMF tranches or Pentagon line items, but they sure as hell understand that hundreds of billions supposedly destined for freedom and democracy have translated into beachfront apartments, designer suits, and champagne galas for the Kiev clique. That is what Project Ukraine has really been about. A laundering operation dressed up as a moral crusade. At the same time, in Europe, the mask is slipping in a different way. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his government, joined by Slovakia, are now preparing to take the European Commission to court over its scheme to cut member states off from Russian gas. This is not a minor procedural dispute. It goes right to the heart of how the EU is weaponizing energy policy, not just against Russia, but against its own citizens. Decisions of this magnitude, whether to sever core economic ties and energy supplies, have traditionally required unanimous consent among member states. But Brussels, under Ursula von der Leyen, deliberately maneuvered around this requirement, shifting the legal basis so that a mere majority vote would suffice, effectively bypassing countries like Hungary and Slovakia that refused to sign on to economic suicide. Orban has been very blunt about what this means. He says openly that the EU's official line is to prepare for war with Russia by 2030. He's not speculating. He sits in the meetings, sees the classified papers, and hears the conversations that ordinary Europeans never hear. He has laid out the classic four-step path to war. First, you break off diplomatic relations. then you impose sanctions, then you end economic cooperation, and finally you move into armed conflict. According to Orban, the EU has already taken most of those steps with respect to Russia. They have severed normal diplomacy, piled on sanctions, and are now deliberately strangling the economic relationship, all while pretending this is some kind of rules-based, values-driven policy. The end point of that trajectory is not stability. It is a direct clash with a nuclear power. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian elite that helped create this disaster has long been voting with its feet. Take the former foreign minister, who slipped quietly off the sinking ship roughly a year to a year and a half ago, alongside former defense minister Reznikov. While Ukraine crumbles, he appears in Europe in a tuxedo with his girlfriend at theaters and high society events. When asked whether he would go to the front lines, his response was essentially, "I already served my country as foreign minister for 2 years." That is the mindset of the Kiev establishment. The country can burn, the men of conscription age can be hunted down in the streets, but the people who helped steer Ukraine into catastrophe choose gala evenings and red carpets abroad. They took their winnings and left the casino early, while their compatriots are told to die for democracy. Look at how Kyiv and its Western sponsors treat anyone in Europe who pushes back against this madness. The president of Slovakia, Peter Pellegrini, has now been placed on the infamous Mirotvorets peacemaker database, the Ukrainian online hit list that publishes personal data on politicians, journalists, and public figures who do not toe the Kyiv line. This is a site with clear ties to Ukrainian security structures, long tolerated and effectively shielded by Western intelligence agencies. It has been associated with threats, intimidation, and, in some cases, attacks. And yet, when an elected president of an EU and NATO member state appears on this so-called kill list, the reaction from Brussels, Washington, and European capitals is silence. No condemnation from Ursula. No outrage from the same people who lecture everyone else about human rights and the rule of law. They are happy to see their own allies intimidated as long as it serves the narrative. Against that backdrop, one development stands out as genuinely significant. The International Court of Justice has agreed to hear Russia's genocide case against the Kiev regime, stretching back to the 2014 Maidan coup. For years, Moscow has argued that ethnic Russians and Russian speakers in Donbass and other regions have been subjected to systematic persecution, attacks on their language, their culture, their church, and, crucially, direct military assaults on civilians long before the special military operation began in 2022. This is not some sudden invention, shelling of cities like Donetsk and Lugansk, torching of people in Odessa, attempts to outlaw the Russian language in schools and public life. All of this has been extensively documented. Kyiv, backed by the collective West, tried to get the case thrown out. They lobbied hard, applied all the pressure they could muster, and insisted that Russia's claims were inadmissible. The expectation in Western capitals was that the ICJ would simply side with them and shut the door. Instead, the court ruled that it would proceed and hear the case in full. The Russian Foreign Ministry was crystal clear. All of Kyiv's objections were rejected, and Russia's demands were accepted for consideration in their entirety. The ICJ, they said, has confirmed the legal admissibility of Russia's claims and expressed its readiness to assess the entire range of crimes committed by the Kyiv regime and its accomplices. That last word, accomplices, is not accidental. Moscow is signaling that it does not intend to stop at mid-level Ukrainian officials. It is preparing an evidentiary record that will implicate Western actors who enabled, armed, and politically protected this campaign. This ties into a broader point that Western elites desperately hope their own publics never grasp. In war, it is the victor who convenes tribunals, not the loser. The EU elite have nurtured a fantasy that they will one day drag Russian leaders before some court they control, confiscate Russian assets, and dictate terms to Moscow. In reality, as the military balance shifts steadily in Russia's favor and the economic war backfires on Europe, it is Russia that is laying the legal and institutional groundwork for post-war accountability. The ICJ's decision to hear the case is one brick in that structure. Moscow's own statements about creating tribunals to investigate crimes in Donbass and elsewhere are another. When this conflict finally ends, it will not be Brussels or Washington writing the verdict. It will be the side that actually prevailed on the battlefield. The information war is part of that struggle. And here again, the West's hypocrisy is staggering. Look at the latest tantrum from Poland's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, who has appointed himself defender-in-chief of the European Union against Elon Musk and anyone who dares criticize Brussels' censorship regime. Sikorski took to X, formerly Twitter, to jeer that Musk should go to Mars and leave Earthlings alone. Then he tried to score a clever little point by demanding to know why Musk and Russian officials complain about EU censorship when X is banned in Russia. Former U.S. Ambassador Michael McFaul chimed in with the same line, accusing Moscow of bald hypocrisy because Russian officials speak on a platform that ordinary Russians cannot access freely. What these people never mention is what actually triggered the Russian decision in the first place. On the 1st of March 2022, Ursula von der Leyen announced that Russian media outlets would be censored and effectively banned across the European Union. Within days, Russia responded by blocking Twitter, at that time still Jack Dorsey's hyper-politicized platform, a favored tool of Western intelligence agencies for regime change and narrative control. Moscow's message was straightforward. If you block our media, we will retaliate against your propaganda outlets. On top of that, Russia had already passed a perfectly reasonable data protection law back in 2015, 2016, requiring major global platforms that collect personal data on Russian citizens to store that data on servers inside Russia. Many companies complied. Some, like LinkedIn, refused and were banned as a result. Twitter, too, chose not to comply fully. So when Sikorski waves around censorship in Russia as if it appeared out of nowhere, he is deliberately ignoring both the EU's own censorship of all Russian media and Russia's long-standing legal framework on data sovereignty. If Musk, as the current owner of X, decided tomorrow to comply with Russian data law and sat down with Russian authorities to work out technical conditions, there is every reason to believe X could operate in Russia. But that reality doesn't fit the West's cartoon version of events, so it is simply omitted. The EU, meanwhile, continues to humiliate itself in its attempts to win the narrative battle. Brussels slapped a $150 million fine on X for alleged lack of transparency and issues with blue check marks, then actually bought advertising on the very platform it was attacking in order to promote the announcement of that fine. X responded by revoking the Commission's advertising capabilities. It was a perfect illustration of who really has leverage on that terrain. European officials will never push for a full ban on X across the EU, no matter how loudly they bluster. They are addicted to the platform themselves. They crave the followers, the exposure, the dopamine hit of likes and retweets. Their egos will not allow them to give that up, even in the name of their own censorship crusade. As if to compensate for that strategic weakness, they launched a clumsy social media campaign. This is my flag, accompanied by pictures of the EU's blue flag with gold stars and boilerplate language about unity, freedom, human rights, and the so-called rules-based international order. It was meant to rally loyalists and project confidence. Instead, the replies underneath those posts have been brutal. Ordinary Europeans, already angry about inflation, energy costs, and endless money for Ukraine, are openly mocking the campaign. They see what the flag now stands for in practice: deindustrialization, blind loyalty to Washington's fantasies, and a march toward confrontation with Russia that no one ever voted for. Put all these strands together and you see a coherent picture. Russia is negotiating from a position of growing strength, willing to accept a reasonable settlement, but entirely prepared to continue the war if Kiev and the West remain delusional. The Kiev regime is corrupt to the core, incapable of serious statecraft, and increasingly abandoned by its own former insiders who cashed out early. The EU leadership is driving its own continent toward economic and possibly military disaster, while silencing dissent at home and tolerating outright intimidation from Ukrainian extremists. And the broader Western establishment, from Washington think tanks to Brussels bureaucrats, continues to insist that reality must bend to their narrative, even as courts like the ICJ, leaders like Orban, and the facts on the ground in Ukraine all signal that the world is moving in Russia's direction.